I used to work at a maximum security facility and drove about 45 minutes each way. As I was driving to work one day, someone pulled out behind me and started acting a little aggressively. I just ignored it though and thought I was being paranoid, but he kept following me. Now the odds of someone following me for 25 plus miles and making all of the same turns had to be 1,000,000 to 1. I started to get nervous when I tried pulling into the side entrance. It was under construction, so I did a U-turn, and then watched this man do the exact same thing. Driving further down the road and entering the main entrance to my work, this guy followed me through the campus, where there are 3 big brick buildings, all surrounded by giant steel double gates, 3 rows of fences, and all with collapsing razor wire. He proceeded to follow me into the parking lot and came up to my car. I rolled down my window and he said something to me. I have no memory at all of what he said, as the adrenaline was pumping, but apparently I was in fight or flight mode, because I remember jumping out and spraying him with pepper spray. He then pulled a small knife out on me, so I sprayed him again. He put the knife away and started just windmill punching me. I blocked the punches, then sprayed what I had left. Thankfully, the only physical damage I got was a bit of blowback from the pepper spray. Another staff member snuck up and called the police and gave them his tag number as he drove down 2 hills, across a field and 2 parking lots, almost hitting the safety sergeant in the process. Unfortunately, he got away. Apparently, either the tags were stolen from a vehicle in Florida and they never found him. I literally have no idea who he was or why he came after me. This mess screwed with my already bad PTSD for months. This happened to me my junior year of high school and has been almost forgotten until my dad brought it up a couple of days ago. I live really close to a shopping centre, about 3 minutes away. Before school, maybe once or twice a week, I'd stop by to grab some donuts or an orange juice. Now I go to this store a lot, so I recognised a decent amount of employees. One particular day before school, I decided to stop by and grab some donuts. I'll explain the layout of the entrance as it's important. As you walk up to the doors, there's a huge set of shopping carts that an employee is normally working at by collecting carts from the parking lot. As you're walking away from the entrance and out of the store and turn left, you go into the main, large parking lot. You can walk straight instead to the side of the building, where there are around 20 parking spots. There's an exit on the side of the building that's closer to my house and less crowded than the main road, and I drive a truck, so I used to park on the side. It's well lit, with cameras, and next to another store, so I've never felt isolated. Anyway, I parked on the side like I normally do, and I walk into the store. As I passed the grocery carts in front of the doors, there was an employee there who I didn't recognize. He said good morning to me. I said it back. Nothing weird. I carried on into the store, get my donuts, pay, and walk out. I see the guy again, and this time he's just staring at me. Okay, kinda weird, but I kept walking to my car. I got to the driver's side and opened the door, hop in, set my food down on the passenger seat, and turned to reach out and close the driver door. As I put my hand out, another hand stops the door from shutting, and the employee from earlier steps in between my door and me. Alarms are going off in my head. He asked me what my name was, and I stupidly gave him my real name, because I was panicking. My name is super common though, something like Sarah. Then he asked for my phone number. I said no, and that I have to get to school as I'm running late. However, he wouldn't take no for an answer, and would not move. I decided to just give him a fake number, and he finally backed out of my door so I could shut it immediately and take off. I got to the parking lot of my school and called my dad to tell him what had just happened and what the guy looked like. He went down to the store and reported it for me, and I thought that was it. But no. A couple of days passed when I received a direct message on Instagram from this guy. There was no way that he could possibly know my last name, just my first, which is very common. I got the DM during my history class, in which we sat in groups of 4. I told the people at my table what had happened, and without bringing up what he looked like or his name, a girl at my table also named Sarah pulled her Instagram page up and asked if that was him. It was, and I asked how she knew. Apparently he had DM'd her as well, and another girl in our class also named Sarah. I had 1 or 2 other friends with the same name, so I asked them if they'd gotten a DM from this guy too, and sure enough they had. One of the girls with my name works at the store with him, and said he was insanely creepy around her all the time, like following her to the break room any time she'd go in, find excuses to be around her, switch shifts to work at the same time, and asking her out every other shift. She told us he was 21, and we were 16, 17 years old, making it even creepier that he was going for all these high school girls with the same name. During lunch I stayed in my history teacher's room with a couple of the girls who'd gotten the messages as well, and we explained to him what was going on. He said to go to campus security and tell them to be sure he wasn't around the school. The girl who works with him went to report it, and that was that. My dad said the manager said she would take care of it when he'd reported it, and the girl who worked with him said she'd talked to her manager as well, and the guy ended up getting fired, and a police report was made. However, nothing could really be done, since he hadn't actually done anything. Here is the DM he sent me that day in history. No clue how he found my Instagram, but our guess was he was messaging a bunch of Sarahs who all happened to be underage. It was around 2015 and I was living in Seattle. I worked in an office that allowed me to bring my dog to work, a 100-pound German Shepherd. He's a big sweetheart, but looks quite scary to strangers. After work one day, I got on the bus home, which was around a 45-minute ride. I noticed someone staring at me, but didn't think much of it. While it was unsettling to be watched, I've had my fair share of odd conversations on the bus, and it wasn't out of the ordinary to encounter weird behavior. I honestly don't remember too much about his appearance, but I do remember thinking he looked fairly normal and didn't seem high or drunk. My bus stop was on a busy street in a sketchier part of town, but it isn't frequently trafficked. When we reached the stop, my dog and I set off on the short trek home, only a few blocks away. As I exited the bus, I noticed the man who had been watching me had exited too. Something was off about him. He seemed intent on keeping stride with me, trailing closely behind. I've heard advice somewhere in the past that you shouldn't go straight home if you're being followed. I'm sure that's situation specific and sometimes it's safer to be in your home, but nothing had happened besides having my personal space invaded, and I didn't feel immediately unsafe. So I opted not to lead this stranger straight to my door. I knew that my partner at the time wasn't at home, so I decided the best plan was to weave through my neighborhood for several blocks to try to lose him. I think a part of me was also wanting to be sure I was being followed at all, or if this person was just happening to be walking in the same direction. After several blocks, it became clear he was following me. I was weaving around erratically, and he was walking the same path. Neither of us spoke to one another, and I was becoming more and more frustrated that anyone would follow a woman home. The streets were quiet, and I couldn't see anybody around who I could signal to for help. I don't think I would have been so surprised this was happening if I was alone and without my dog. I can't imagine anyone in their right mind following someone with a large German Shepherd. I started walking faster when I rounded a corner and quickly ducked into a walkway, hugging a duplex of a block from my house. I was hoping the pathway would wrap around the house completely so I could get out of the line of sight of this person, but I was met with a fence to my face and didn't have time to backtrack. I was ultimately cornered in this nook between a house and a fence and a hedge. I crouched down with my dog and waited for the guy to pass us. I watched as the man strolled by the walkway, seemingly not noticing us at all. He didn't turn his head or even gaze in our direction. I decided that we'd stay there for a few minutes just to make sure he was gone. Of course my dog was as calm as ever, just chilling on his side taking a nap. Yeah, very helpful. About 3 minutes went by. Just as I was thinking it was safe to head home, the man stepped into my line of sight. He didn't make eye contact with me, just as he hadn't the first time he walked by. He was moving calmly and deliberately, and slowly came to a stop as soon as he was right in front of me, just off of the curb. He was about 2 yards away now, facing me and not directly looking, with just a sidewalk and a grassy strip between us. I watched him as he started to unload his pockets. He had a number of metal objects he was taking out, placing them in a line. At this point I called 911 and told them what was happening, that someone was following me and showing erratic behavior. The cops made it there quickly, and as soon as they pulled up, the dispatcher advised me to get out of there. I hightailed it out of my hiding spot and took a non-direct path home, since my house was technically in the line of sight of where I was crouched. I don't know what ended up happening with him, but fortunately I never saw him again. I'm not sure if he was on drugs, mentally unstable, or both. I don't know if he had a malicious intent. I do hope, though, that he got the help that he needed. The college I attended was in a very tiny town called Pullman in eastern Washington. There wasn't much to do there, other than drink and go to parties. I had never really been much of a partygoer myself, so I was one of the few that wasn't spending every single weekend getting hammered. On one of these particular weekends, I had spent pretty much the whole day in my dorm room and was antsy for some social interaction. I hadn't done much that day other than study, and I wanted to at least get out of my dorm. I texted my best friend at the time and we decided we would go to the football stadium to look at the stars. The football stadium at the time remained open 24/7, and when we left to go there it was around 12 a.m, so the stadium lights had shut off and we had a beautiful view of the stars. We walked to the stadium in great spirits and had a wonderful night talking and laughing. However, on the way back everything changed. By the time we were making our way back to our dorm rooms, it was a little after 2 in the morning, and as we were walking down the main road, we noticed a jeep approaching. Nothing too unusual, although the lights were off, so my best friend, not knowing how to SSDGM, stay sexy and not get murdered, used her hands to make a flashing signal at them, telling them that their lights were off. As soon as she did this, they got only a short distance past us when we heard them slam on their brakes and turn around, driving up the wrong lane of traffic to come back. We were right by a sky bridge at the time this happened, which had stairs leading up to it. We ducked behind the stairs, but the jeep was driving back and forth looking for us. We ended up having to play a sick game of duck and hide on the stairs until the jeep finally parked up. When it did, we had gotten to the top of the stairs and laid ourselves flat on the sky bridge, hiding in the shadows. We had a clear view of them, and as soon as we were flat on the ground, we saw 5 men get out of the jeep. Not just that, but they each had a baseball bat. These men were checking the bushes and surrounding areas, again looking for us. I called the police and quietly explained the situation. After about 10 minutes of the men searching and whistling and swinging their bats around, they finally left. Not long after that, the police showed up. but there wasn't much they could do except offer us a ride home in their cruiser. I have no idea what those men's intentions were, but I'm so glad I never found out. I had just moved to Jackson, Tennessee from Miami, Florida, because I had just gotten out of an extremely physical, emotional, and mentally abusive relationship that lasted 3 years. Around sometime in June, my current boyfriend and I had been doing a trip pretty much every weekend. We would visit a new hiking and waterfall area, and although there isn't a nightlife, Tennessee is amazingly beautiful. We went to this place called Narrows of the Harpeth. It was one of the more underwhelming places that we'd been to, but was still enjoyable. After we'd found a cool place to sit and swim after hiking for 2 hours, a few shots and one blunt later, it was time to make the hour trip back to Jackson. So I put my shoes on and slipped my dress back on, which is a little bit above the knee. Like if I bend too far forward, my bum would be on display. I own my body and sexuality, so showing some skin never really bothered me, and I don't really think about it, because I just expect people to respect me as I respect them, and the way they dress. Anyway, on the way back to the car, I, being the tipsy dumbass I am, managed to trip and fall and scrape my leg pretty badly. It's actually scarred now. So I tell my boyfriend that we need to go to Walmart once back in Jackson, so I could thoroughly clean my wound with hydrogen peroxide and neosporin. My boyfriend says okay, and an hour later we are at Walmart. It is only 9 p.m. going on 10 p.m. Not late by any means. We got what I needed, but because I was still tipsy and pretty high from the blunt that I'd finished in the car ride home, I got distracted very easily and remembered that my boyfriend got me the wrong size case for my iPhone. He'd gotten the Max instead of just the Pro, so I wanted an idea of what I could trade it for, and he wanted to look at some of the games as well, as a gaming PC for me. So I'm happily tipsy and excited to go find a new phone case. And when we get there, there was a man looking at the cases. I said, "Excuse me, sorry, can I look at those cases you're standing in front of?" He just looked at me with a blank yet dirty look, nodded and stepped over. So I'm looking through the shelf, and about 5 minutes in, this lady and what I assume are her 2 children approach me. This all being in the middle of a pandemic too, so I'm thrown off by how close she is to me, especially with her baby that looks no older than 9 months. I step back and she grabs my arm and says, "Oh my God, wow, I haven't seen you in forever. Look at that hair, wow." Her grip tightens, and at this point my heart is racing. My face got really hot and I'm visibly scared. That's when my boyfriend says, "Everything okay, babe?" He looks at me equally concerned. "Does this lady know my mum? Who is she? Is she an old family friend that I don't remember?" Now, I'm originally from Ohio, and we have family here, but I don't know any of my family that lives in Tennessee. My mum loves to brag about her kids, so I'm trying to shake this weird feeling. But her daughter keeps looking behind me, so I go to turn around and she says, "No, don't turn around. Walk with me, please. Just trust me." I don't know why, but I felt she was being genuine, so I just followed her. We stepped over to the side by the baby clothes, which is still in front of the electronics, and she says, "Baby, I'm so sorry to scare you, but there are these 3 men surrounding you. They went by the laptops, talked, and then I noticed the guy taking photos and videos of you while you were bent over looking at the cases. The other man was the tall guy next to you, and I don't know where the 3rd man went." All I can remember is this high-pitched ringing in my ears. My stomach flipped and I felt like I was going to be sick. I never knew what people meant when they said, "Everything slowed down." But in that moment, everything moved in slow motion, and I was freaked out to the point that I have no clue what she said afterwards. It was as if I'd blacked out for a moment, and then quickly came to the realization that the family and my boyfriend were looking at me visibly panicked. I turned around and there he was. Hispanic, shorter than me at maybe 5'1", but he was very much well built and looked to be about 40. The other man, who was white, was maybe in his 40s and about 5'11". I'll never forget the dead blank rage in that man's Hispanic eyes. Like I was his first meal in 5 days, and I'd been stolen from him, and he was ready to kill in order to have it back. That's when I saw the white man walk over to him. They said something as they both looked at me, then they looked back at each other, said something else, and started to walk slowly towards us. At that point we all turned and headed for the registers, and that's when I thanked my lucky stars, because there were about 3 cops at the front of the store. By the time I'd rudely pushed past people to get to self-checkout with tears in my eyes, I frantically repeatedly said, "Excuse me," to anyone who got in front of me. I looked back and just saw them standing there, with the third guy this time. My heart sank and I wanted to pass out at that moment. I guess it looked like I was going up to the cops because they hightailed it once they'd seen me get close to them. Now, me being high and being a black woman, I wasn't going to chance the cops turning this around on me, because I was simply stoned and tipsy. My only thought was to get to the car, get to the gun, don't stop, and run. My boyfriend said he could barely keep up with me at one point, and I grabbed his hand so tightly that he had to force the grip off because it felt like I was going to crush his hand. And before anyone bashes my boyfriend, I don't expect a man to be my savior. Also, he isn't the angry, confrontational type. He is very calm and level-headed, and wouldn't hurt a fly unless I asked him to get rid of it for whatever reason. I just knew I was the target, and I'm putting him at risk. I knew they could have easily jumped him, and one of them could overpower me after taking him out. I probably looked crazed, half walking and running past everyone, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to become another missing sister. We made it to the car safely and peeled out of there. I've never seen him drive so fast, as he is beyond careful and would never speed. We sat at a Sonic for about an hour to make sure we weren't being followed. We recounted everything that happened, and I just couldn't believe we were both too tipsy to notice that I had become prey in somewhere as simple as Walmart. I've never felt so stupid and irresponsible in my life. So I used to work as a personal trainer at a very familiar gym in my city to help pay for college. The neighborhood this gym was in has 2 other gyms across the street, so we would have a lot of clients changing from place to place. I worked the night shift since I was out of class at about 6 p.m, so I worked from 6:30 to 10:30. Usually a lot of guys would go for experimental classes at night, and I was known for working with the bodybuilders. At around 9 p.m, this huge guy with a very arrogant posture walked in for an experimental class. The secretary immediately sent him to me, and I was more than happy to help him out, although I was pretty sure he'd already worked out and needed no help whatsoever. Weird, but okay. Throughout the whole hour, this guy was asking me very personal questions, like, where do you live? Are you single? What's your shoe size, etc. As I was working, I just politely tried to keep our conversation focused on the training and exercises that we were doing. When the class was over, he looked at me and asked, "Can I have your number?" "I'm sorry, but I have a fiancé," which was true. "Are you sure? I don't usually take no for an answer," he said. Wow. Already wishing I wasn't at work so I could just walk away, I reply, "Yes. I am here just to help you exercise properly, nothing else." He then puts his finger at my face and says, "When I get my gun, you won't say no to me," and walked out of the door. For almost a month, I needed to have a male co-walker walk with me to the parking lot late at night, because this guy would be at the corner, waiting for me to come out. He would stare at me and smile, then wait for me to leave. Later on, I found out he was using the gym across the street and had taken my car's license plate. I had to ask one of my clients that was a cop to scare him off. Even to this day, I can't get his smiling face out of my head. For backstory, I'm a 30-year-old female on the petite side. I live on the East Coast where sunrise isn't until 6:37 in the winter. I worked opening shifts at Starbucks as a manager, and on these particular shifts I picked up the girl I opened with because she lived close to the store and didn't have a car. This takes place at around 4:30 a.m. and it's very dark. I'm driving down an empty main road, decently close to the girl's apartment complex, when an old, kinda beat-up forest green sedan seemingly comes out of nowhere and is behind me. We're the only cars on the road, and I turn on my blinker to turn at a light on the way to the complex, which is in a very dark area of town, behind a bunch of offices and developments. I'm now 5 minutes away when the first red flag for me is how quickly the car turns on their blinker after I do. They started speeding up a bit too. I sped up a bit more and they matched me. I get a bad feeling, so I figured I'd take an unexpected turn to lose them and circle back. As soon as my blinker turned on, so did theirs. Any turn I take now, they are taking as well. I'm freaking out after a few minutes of trying to lose them, so I pulled into a nursing home parking lot, assuming they'll give up. Well, they turn in too without any turn signal. They parked across from me, and I can see that the driver is a woman, probably in her 50s, with a small white dog. She looked slightly unkempt, but not crazy or out of it, just like a dumpy middle-aged woman. She rolled down her window, so I rolled down mine, and I asked her, "Is everything okay?" To which she replies in a mumble, "I thought you were my friend. She is the same kind of car," or something along those lines. I've never seen her before, so I say, "Okay, I'm not, but no problem. Have a good day." Weird, but okay, fine. I shrug it off and go on my way. I wasn't too shaken up. If it had been a man, on the other hand, I would have straight up called 911 immediately. As I left the parking lot, the woman started following me again. I'm close to the girls' complex on some very dark roads, and I'm freaking out again. I figured she's obviously not quite right, and she wouldn't pull into a big apartment complex parking lot. Well, I was wrong. I'm at a stop sign right before the entrance, crazy lady behind me and all, when I notice a red fox scurry by. Now this is only important because I strongly believe in signs from the universe, so it was a weird coincidence that I see my favorite animal in this moment of terror. I pulled into the complex parking lot, and crazy lady parked next to me this time. We're just sitting there for a moment, neither of us looking at each other. I locked my doors and rolled down my passenger side window halfway, finger on the button, in case things get weird. She then rolls down her driver's window, and I ask very bluntly, "Why are you following me?" She then replies, "I'm following you," and then repeats what she said to me at the last parking lot, that she thought I was her friend. It was all very strange, almost scripted. Now I'm feeling very uneasy, because it is extremely obvious that she's been following me, and I know it's smart to mention that I'm meeting someone, so I say, "Well, I'm clearly not, and I'm here to pick up a friend, so I'm not sure what to tell you." I roll up my windows and she watches me take out my phone and call my employee, to whom I say, "Come down this second," and she leaves immediately once I am off the phone. My employee rushes down and I explain what is happening, and we both agree it's creepy as hell. As we pull out of the complex entrance, the red fox runs in front of my car, causing me to slam on my brakes. The fox stops and then runs off into some woods on the side of the road. I have never forgotten this morning, ever. I never got a license plate or anything, because I was so freaked out and just wanted to get to work. I recounted this on Facebook because it shook me up badly, and many people said it sounded like human trafficking. Let me know what you think. A few years ago, I was on a dating site where I matched with a police officer. I thought his dog was cute and figured this was my opportunity to finally pet a canine police dog. I was quickly disinterested, though, after listening to him complain about his recent divorce. I don't recall the exact details, but I remember it was very apparent that he was the problematic person in that relationship. I was also really grossed out by how he fetished me for my big boobs, tattoos, and colourful hair. I was very upfront and told him I wasn't interested at this point, and that he was setting off some red flags for me. He begged me to give him another chance, but I said no and blocked his number. A few days later, I got a knock on my door at around midnight. My heart dropped, and it startled me so much. I looked out of my peephole, and I see a stranger holding food. It's an Uber Eats delivery guy. I told him through the door that I hadn't ordered any food, but he said someone else ordered it, and he knew my name. I asked who ordered it, and he said a name that I didn't recognize, so I told him that I didn't want the food, and gave him the directions to the dumpster to throw it out, because at this point I have no idea if he is actually from Uber. Later on, I was going through my dating app matches again, and realized it was the cop's name. I go through my blocked messages, and this guy had texted me a lot. The last text was, "I hope you liked your dinner." I decided that it was best I unblock this man so I can keep an eye on what he is saying, in case I need to be worried about my safety, or if I'm going to need to go and buy some bear mace to drop a cop. A few weeks later, I am at work. I'm a hairstylist, and I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I answered it because I assumed it was a new client. The voice on the other line said, "Hey Rachel, I'm at Starbucks across the street. What's your drink order?" I asked who it was, and I didn't have them in my appointment book, assuming it was a regular, and I'd made a scheduling error. He said his name, and again my heart dropped. How does he know where I work? I asked him how he knew where I lived and worked, and he explained that he did a reverse image search on photos from my dating profile, found my social media and my Yelp page from my salon, then looked up my address from there. I told him that I was calling his station and reporting him for stalking, and if he ever comes near me, I will consider it a threat and will be ready to physically defend myself. Even after all that, he still begged me to give him a chance. I hung up, called the police station he works at, and put in a complaint. Unfortunately, though, they won't even let me email screenshots of my creepy texts, so I could tell nothing would be done. The lady literally said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's going through a lot right now," literally treating it like he's the victim. He mostly left me alone afterwards, but I was so scared living alone for the first time in my life. I have a semi-popular meme page on Instagram with about 8,000 followers, so I sifted through and found about 8 of his accounts. I blocked them all and moved on. This was several years ago now, but all these memories came flooding back when I noticed a familiar profile photo on an account who'd commented on a post, so I must have missed an account of his when blocking. I had posted a photo of me holding 2 big tunas that I'd caught on a fishing trip, and he'd commented, "God, I wish I was one of those fish. I'd love to know what it's like to be held by you." It all started 2 years ago when I dropped out of school. I was at home every day suffering with depression and social anxiety, and since both my parents worked, I was alone in the house a lot of the time. On one particular day like this, I was just chilling watching Netflix and eating some snacks in my room, when I heard the interphone ringing. Now I never answer the interphone when I'm home alone, because of my anxiety, so I just ignore it usually, even if the person was really persistent. A few seconds later though, I heard noises in the hall of my residence. We're on the ground floor, so when people make noise, we hear it. I assumed it was just the neighbours, but a few seconds later, I heard someone ringing and brutally knocking on the front door. With my issues being the way they are, I started to feel very anxious, and I grabbed a knife, just in case this person was trying to break into my house. But then, silence. At that point, I thought it was all over. Then 1 or 2 minutes later, I heard someone who was literally beating at the kitchen window. It was so hard that my window opened. At this point, I was hiding in the hallway with my knife, and I got to see the man's face when he looked into the open kitchen window to see if anybody was there. I was terrified and I didn't know what to do. I managed to discreetly look at the man's face. It was really disturbing. He looked very chilled, cold, and relaxed. He looked into the kitchen one last time and left. I could tell there was something wrong with this guy, and I was so scared that I called my aunt to come and pick me up, because I really didn't want to be at home after what just happened. So I was waiting, still holding my knife and incredibly anxious until she arrived. Days after this incident, thankfully I never saw this guy again. So being that that was 2 years ago, yesterday my dad told me something he'd never told me before, as he didn't want me to be any more anxious than I already was. There were 2 girls, who were sisters that also lived in the neighborhood, and they saw a guy hanging around our house for a few days, especially around my bedroom window. And my bedroom window is around the front by the parking lot, and the guy was hiding behind cars and stalking me through my window. I had no clue that this was happening, but one day one of these sisters took a photo of the guy, so he knew he'd been discovered. The girl who took the photo told my dad about all of this, and my dad was watching if the guy was still around our residence, but he never saw him, and since then nobody had seen him again. My opinion is that this guy's first move was to knock and ring at the door, to see if there was anybody there. I don't know if he figured that I was there or not, but I think his second move was to stalk me and hang around my window, but when one of the sisters took a photo of him, he knew he was screwed. That's why when my dad was watching if the guy was still around, he didn't show up. He knew he was completely found out. A question still haunts me though. What would have happened if nobody had seen him? If nobody had taken pictures of him? And most importantly, what were his intentions? Why was I the target of this guy? There are too many questions and not enough answers. I was 20 at the time when this happened about 4 years ago, and it was then I met the guy who would become my grocery store stalker. He was standing outside the store collecting money for the Salvation Army Christmas time donations. Now I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places I frequent, just to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall with a mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family. Dark circles under dark eyes, short black hair, and a kind of vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe 2 minutes. It was just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot, nothing particularly memorable or interesting. Then I waved goodbye and went home. Little did I know that that single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed and I hadn't seen him again, until one day as I was grocery shopping with a friend, we were chatting, and she suddenly went really quiet and kind of recoiled backwards, looking behind me. I turned around to see this guy, who had to be at least 6'4", towering over me, not 8 inches from my body. He said hi, and told me that he'd remembered me from that December I had talked to him, and then he asked for my number. Me being young and never having experienced this type of interaction before, told him I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and text him later. I kind of half waved my phone at him, pointing out my at-the-time boyfriend, whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," hoping he would get the picture. But no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting I blocked, without letting him get my phone number. However, what really made my blood run cold was what he said after I'd put my phone away. He leaned in really close, and in a low voice told me that whatever he texts me is for my eyes only. At this point, I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable and just said, "Yeah, sure, nice talking to you, but we gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking why she didn't bail me out. Apparently he scared her too, with his getting so close to me, and she didn't know what to do. Now I want to make it clear, I'm not exactly a small girl. At 5'8" and solidly built, I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female. But this guy made me feel tiny and scared, and in the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had hoped that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but that was unfortunately not the case. After that initial meeting with him saying that creepy thing about his texts for being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time that I went to that store. No matter what checkout lane I was in, he always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finishing shopping, and every time I was in the store, I would notice him out of the corner of my eye watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time I even caught him following me out to my car. That was it for me, and I was terrified, so I decided to say something to the managers. After letting them know what was going on, they assured me they would tell him not to talk to me. After that he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance every time that I went up there. It got so bad I felt so frightened that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I am one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to the point where I'll stop doing something. I had hoped that maybe it was a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a big store, and maybe he just had things to do that just happened to be in the areas I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I'd started doing this, I realized that every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the areas of the store I was in. During my last encounter with him, I went up to the store to grab just 2 or 3 items that I needed for dinner that night. And firstly, I saw him standing outside the store when I got there, and with his back to me, I quickly ran inside, hoping he hadn't seen me. Unfortunately though, a few minutes later, I saw him at the very back of the store, and items in hand, I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if he would appear, and he did. I watched as he looked up and down the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step outside. At this point I quickly ran into the nearest open cashier, rang up my items and stuck my head out to the door to look for him. I didn't see him there immediately, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. Away near the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up, and as I was walking towards my car, I realized that I could see him standing by the entrance that I had first entered and ducked behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. So after a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store, and I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car as soon as he was far enough away that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and to my horror, when I looked up, he was standing there about 15 feet from my car with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew he'd followed me. He knew I knew. I fully believe he had chased after me when I made it to my car and had grabbed the nearest cart to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and immediately told my grandfather what had happened, and I began crying and shaking. My grandfather told me to get in the car, as we were going to settle this right now. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me in and demanded we spoke with the managers immediately. Both of them. When the managers arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell them what had been happening, and demanded that they ensure he left me alone, or that he would involve the police. The managers swore up and down that they would take care of it, and as far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately, because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began, told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself, but that any time I went with her, she would never see him. I fully believe he knew whenever I was there, only this time, instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I have never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day, seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot. It still creeps me out to think he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store, and that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted.